Trump was shown up in the Oval Office by his top trade representative in an embarrassing moment for the president. Robert Lighthizer contradicted his boss over the importance of a memorandum of understanding with Beijing. Let's have a quick look at part of the exchange.
It's just called a memorandum of understanding. It's a legal term. It's a contract.
And would you think that would be a very long-term deal, sir?
Yes. Contracts last while they last. There's no term. They last while they last.
Mr. President, on North Korea...
By the way, I disagree. I think that a memorandum of understanding is not a contract to the extent that we want. We're doing a memorandum of understanding that will be put into a final contract, I assume.
Amazing scenes in the Oval Office there. Well, joining us for tonight's Taking Stock panel, Stephen Shearer, the digital CEO and former CEO of Facebook Australia, and John Rolfe, cost of living editor at News Corp. Thank you both for being with us. I mean, what springs to mind when you see an exchange like that between the president and one of his top aides in the Oval Office, Stephen?
Uncomfortable moment for him. I don't think Trump was uncomfortable, but yeah, nobody wants to be put in that spot. My interpretation of that was I think Trump has an understanding of an MOU that comes from the business world, which is it is non-binding generally. It's just something you then put into a term sheet or something that's more binding. But clearly in the diplomatic world there's a different meaning of that. And so for whatever reason they weren't on the same page for the definition of MOU.
And was that the right place to hash it out?
Oh, this is the stuff, you know, the part of the iceberg that we're not ever meant to see. But, hey, this is the Donald Trump presidency. We get to go and see it all play out in real time as if we were still watching The Apprentice. So for me, what comes to mind is a reality TV show or Saturday Night Live. It's quite extraordinary. But I come down firmly on the side of the Donald in this one. That particular trade bureaucrat, I think the next agreement that he's going to be working on will be in North Korea. And I mean, what sort of an idiot undermines their boss like that? If he wanted to correct him on what an MOU means in diplomatic circles, let's take that offline. You do not do it in front of the world's press and the other side's trade team. It is totally ridiculous and out of line. His next job will be slightly outside of China.
Yeah. But is it? I mean, did he need to... He couldn't let that definition just sit if it was the incorrect one. Did his aide do the right thing?
Oh, I think in the moment you might want to get pedantic, or you decide that you want to defend yourself. And clearly, sitting in front of Trump like that, I thought the camera angle was great as well. It gives you the sense of, he's there and his desk is cleared. He's just sitting there and he's just staring, shaking his head. And all the things that you can criticize Trump for, one thing is probably not that he doesn't do. He doesn't not speak his mind. He speaks his mind, and you can see him sitting there, and what comes to his brain comes out his mouth. And so anybody, I think, working with Trump has to, plan for that contingency, is that if you're going to cross swords with him, you need to be ready, because he's not going to shut up. He's just going to get right in your face and in that case, embarrass him. And, I think his trade representative, that he's a pretty important person in the world of trade, was clearly embarrassed and undermined in that one.
Yeah, and his staff turnover would suggest that it's impossible to counter for that unpredictability of just whatever he thinks he says.
Yeah, and I think the Chinese were, sitting in the room as well. So it seemed like a weird staging to me. It's like they're sitting in the Oval Office having this conversation. I'm sure there was a bigger context, but it just seemed like a weird scene to begin with.
Absolutely, it was bizarre, and as you said, John, this is in a way, I mean, it's on the biggest stage there is, but this is a boss and an employee, openly insubordinate, you could argue. Do you think that there's a lesson in here about how to handle a situation like that for those of us who aren't the President of the United States?
Well, I think that I've seen a lot of CEOs do results presentations, and they've got different styles. Some of them are across the detail, every single thing in that, maybe half-yearly result. They know what the levers were that led to particular outcomes. They can explain every intangible. Others can't, and they're very good at deferring to those within their team, and they'll have them present who can answer the detail. And I can think of the former Optus CEO, Chris Anderson, as one example of that type of CEO style. I think, not that the Donald's going to take lessons from anyone, it would be great if he did do that, if he just deferred to people. If he doesn't know whether the MOU, because what we didn't see before that clip was he gets asked a question about whether this MOU is going to be long-term, and he says, no, MOUs are only ever short-term, and that's when his trade representative steps in and corrects him, saying that, no, they're actually a legally binding contract in this context. So I think if he doesn't know, don't say anything. And certainly for the trade representative, don't undermine your boss in public.
Stephen, any thoughts there as the digital CEO, someone who's managed a lot of people? Do you think there's a lesson here?
I think I agree. Countering your boss in front of an audience like that is never a good idea. And I think with Mr. Trump, you've got this extra sort of unpredictable nature that you need to manage for. But you contrast it with somebody like Obama, for example. I can imagine Obama in that same situation. He would know that an MOU in that context meant something different than in the business context. He'd be across that level of detail. But clearly the current president just doesn't get to that level of detail, so it just pops into his mind to contradict somebody in that room. It must be a really hard place to work if you've got your boss constantly ready to sort of throw you under the bus, which I think Trump is ready to do. So some of these guys might just say, well, I'm going to go down fighting rather than just get thrown under the bus anyway.
And he did.
Yeah, as you say there with the turnover, as Sophie mentioned. Now, there was another story that really took us by surprise today, which is that apparently the content moderators that are used by Facebook are reportedly underpaid and miserable. The story published in The Verge claims that third-party moderating services used by Facebook to keep the network clear of objectionable and illegal content, they're paid less than $30,000 per year. The moderators are also said to be regularly turning to drugs and alcohol to cope with what they see in the course of the job. This is an interesting opportunity to speak to somebody who was Facebook Australia's CEO, someone who knows a lot about what's going on in the social media world. Do you think that something like this is understood to be widespread?
Well, I think what's happening here is over the past couple of years, Facebook and YouTube and Google and others, but particularly Facebook, have had to hire a lot of people to moderate content. We've had this big blow up around the types of content on the platform and what's happening and how it's being managed by the platforms themselves. Facebook used to try to solve that problem through technology, algorithm. The algorithm would basically solve the problem. Facebook got to the point where it discovered the algorithm's not good enough yet. We need to actually hire human beings, and particularly those are the demands of society now, is we need to get more of this content under control. So that involves hiring a lot of people. I think Facebook has hired about 20,000 people just in the past couple of years. You know, that's more than doubling the size of the business just in a couple of years. And most of those are these content moderator people, many of them who are sort of outsourced or third parties. So I think that's one thing to keep in mind. This is a very fast ramp up of lots of people just being trained to do something, and there's always going to be challenges with that. It is done by third parties, and so it's not Facebook employees or third party employees, and there's challenges there. And I think the third thing is just the nature of the job itself. We were talking earlier about the federal police and other authorities where there's people whose jobs is to have to look at content that's very disturbing. Somebody has to do it. Here it's happening at scale. There's just millions of pieces of content. So you do have people that are sitting in front of thousands of pieces of content a day or a week, and over time that content's going to have an impact on them. They're human beings as well. So I think that I have a lot of sympathy for people who have to do those kinds of jobs, and clearly the working conditions are really tough. I'm not sure what's put in place around them to help them with these jobs. And the pay, if that is true. I mean, unfortunately in the United States there seem to be jobs that people do for ridiculously low pay simply because that's the nature of the economy. But I do think it's absurd people are paid that little to do that tough a job.
Yeah, I mean, could you put a price on how much you'd be prepared to work for, to be exposed to that sort of stuff all day and for that to be, the sum total of your day at work looking at awful stuff?
I can tell you what it isn't. It's not $15 an hour, which is what these people are being paid. I read the piece of journalism that really has thrown light upon this. It's an extraordinary piece of work, and I think it's staggering that people are being subjected to that. And you said you weren't sure what sort of support was being offered. So the story says that there is an on-site counsellor, but in the anecdotal example that begins this article, the person has to get up and decide whether or not a piece of content in which a person is murdered is something that can be put out there on the social media platform. They realise it isn't, and her voice begins quivering as she makes that decision in front of a group of her colleagues in the training before she goes into her $15 an hour job. She then has to leave and go to a toilet. She gets a weak hug from her boss or future boss, and the counsellor hasn't turned up to work yet. It's not good enough. Facebook has to do better. And yes, look, they've got some difficulties in having to ramp up quickly because they didn't do enough before. Unfortunately, social media there's just so much spewed out there. It's unfortunate that people feel the need to ever want to share that type of content, and I really feel for the people who have found themselves in these jobs.
Yeah. As Stephen said, these are human beings and somebody has to do it. I just wonder, how long is this going to last? How long until it is a robot who gets to do this? The algorithm, as you said previously, is this always going to be something that people have to do?
Well, I can tell you that the likes of Facebook and Google are throwing a lot of resources at trying to solve this from a technical perspective, so that you don't have human beings doing it. You have machines, you have algorithms figuring it out. We're not there yet. They're putting billions of dollars of resources and trying to figure it out. It's probably 5 to 10 years away before you can literally kind of pull the people out of the equation and have machines do it. And it's simply because of a couple things. One is the quantity of the content, right? The volume is just vast. Billions of pieces of content go up on these platforms literally every day. And so that is impossible for a human being to moderate on their own. You need thousands of them, and you need machines to help. So machines are doing a lot of the work, but it's the stuff that's hard for machines to make the judgment call that are being put in front of humans. Because sometimes that there's cultural context around it. Sometimes it's hard to identify exactly what was happening. Things like hate speech are really hard for artificial intelligence to understand at this level today, because hate speech has a lot of context around it. And so all this stuff winds up in front of, this is the hardest nuts for the AI to crack, and it winds up in front of people who have to look at it all day. I think it's probably one of the worst possible jobs you could have, and it should be paid really well, and those people who are doing it should be given amazing support.
Yeah, certainly a significant issue that is ongoing there. One more thing to talk about tonight is that there's now the Uber for breakups. It has arrived. So the question here is, would you pay $100 to soften the blow of a breakup? There's a company called Onward, which is in New York, and it's a new service that helps people pack, find housing, move out and move on, they say. That is when a relationship falls apart. So, John, thoughts? What do you think?
Look, I think this will find a niche in that segment of the population that likes to break up with people via text message. So these are people...
Is there something wrong with that?
That is rough. Come on.
So, yeah, look, I mean... when I first heard of it, I thought what it was offering $99 of advice on how to actually do the breakup, and I would pay for that. But I would not pay someone to help me find somewhere else to live. I mean, there are obviously cash-rich, time-poor people. This is another inconvenience in their life, and they want some help, and somebody's willing to offer that help at different levels, right through to telling them where to go and eat. They can't make a decision, their relationship's broken down, they don't know what to do next. Yeah,
they're a bit shaky.
Yeah, look, it's just...
Fair enough.
Good luck to them.
Good luck to them. Stephen, thoughts?
I'm a little more optimistic about this idea. I think this is... I love when businesses go out and figure out an unmet need and then pull the pieces together to meet that need. And I think this is only partly a technology story. You're delivering it through an app or through technology, but essentially all the pieces exist without technology. But a business has gone and put this together and is targeting those folks who get into that situation. I'm a little less hard on people. I think everybody's time poor these days. And I looked at the pricing. I thought the pricing seemed pretty reasonable for the services they're offering. Hey, I might use that for, anytime you graduate from university or you move cities or something. You know what a pain it is to get, everything hooked up in your services and find a place to live and furnish your apartment and your house, meet friends. These things all take time, and they lead to social isolation and other problems. So in a way, I think this could be a service that helps people get over the pain of the breakup relatively quickly, at least with some of that practical support. So if you're going through an emotional time, the last thing you want to do is have to be calling the electricity company to get your power hooked up. If you got a service that can take care of that and put furniture in your new apartment, then you can focus on your healing and maybe sign up for the counseling service. That's another app that you can go.
Ground floor investor right over there.
Oh yeah, I thought this was a great idea when I saw it.
If only they could take away the heartache, but that's the only bit an app can't solve, really, isn't it? Thanks so much for being with us tonight, Stephen Shearer, John Rolfe.
Thank you.
Great to have you both here too.